Hello everyone, we've come to the end of the course and I just want to make some final remarks about religion in the contemporary world and then look at some of the course offerings in RLCT and then do a quick overview of the final exam. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about religion globally, and I hope you'll know by now that we should never assume because things are certainly in Canada that they're the same around the world. So I want to look at sort of how religion is faring in different parts of the globe. So as I think I mentioned at the beginning of the course, in places like India, every survey shows that the vast majority of Indian people are religious. And it's interesting to see that in the Indian context, religion is not seen as opposed to science or technology. The way it is in Canada, often people feel they have to choose between a scientific worldview or a religious worldview. That, in fact, isn't the way it plays out, partly because of the differences between Hinduism and religions like Christianity. So that's just one example of some of the differences that we're seeing across the globe. I wanted to use this graphic just to give some idea of what it looks like statistically worldwide. So even a quick glance shows that the majority of the world's people remain religious, with a large amount of the population clustering in Christianity, Islam, and then Hinduism. So, of course, this will vary from region to region. And so, for instance, in the former Soviet Union, we're seeing a resurgence of religion actually sponsored by the state. You may or may not know, but under communism in Russia, religion was essentially illegal. And so we're now seeing it re-emerging. In communist China, the laws related to religion have become less restrictive. And so Buddhist monasteries have reopened, Taoist monasteries have reopened. However, the communist government has come into conflict with the Christian community in China on a number of occasions. So there's still a lot of tension, as you would expect, between communism and religion. In parts of Western Europe, if you go strictly by things like church attendance, you would see very small numbers of religious people, but it gets more complicated when we look at countries like Finland or Denmark, where actually the state still supports the church. So these are all very complex situations, all very different. But we can see that the majority of people remain religious. As we can see in the Canadian case, attitudes to religion differ even within one country. And so I want to use Bill 21 as a way to look at this and relate back to that lecture on secularism. So legally, officially, Canada is a secular state, which means that all religions are equal under Canadian law. And according to the Charter of Rights, all Canadians have the right to express their religion, to follow whatever religion they wish. And what we see with Bill 21 is in Quebec, this bill was tabled in 2019 that prohibits any public expression of religion for those who work in the public sector in Quebec. And this has caused a huge amount of controversy. Now, officially, the law refers to any public expression: turban, hijab, cross, yarmulke. But as many have said, it's pretty clear that this law is mostly directed at the Muslim and Sikh populations of Quebec. And so this has caused a huge conflict within Canada because, as I said earlier, the Constitution guarantees freedom of religion in Canada. The bill was greeted by protests across the province of Quebec, and also huge amounts of discussion all around Canada, sort of wondering what this means for the Constitution. And so I don't pretend that I'm going to get at all aspects of this question, but there's no doubt at all that Quebec has a very different understanding of secularism. And so Quebec is much closer to the French attitude than it is to the rest of Canada on this issue. So when we were in class, when I would ask this question about the role of religion in a secular state, my students would have a very different response. But within Quebec, because of the Quiet Revolution and the way their history played out, it was extremely opposed to religion. And so when you look at the arguments around the bill, argument number one is that Quebec is a nation. Argument number two is that this is the Quebec's understanding of secularism, that there can be no expression of religion in the public sphere. So this was, of course, problematized when it was pointed out that in the Quebec legislature there was a giant cross on the wall, and then the reply was that that's heritage. So you can see that there's many issues in play. So I'm not going to tell you how to think about this, but I'll be posting an article from Maclean's, and I'm hoping you will engage with some of these issues. So as you come to the conclusion of your first course in religious studies, I wanted to give you some idea of what was available in the Religions and Cultures program. And there are a variety of professors teaching on a wide variety of topics. So I just I've listed some of them here. And so they really, we have run the gamut here. So I won't go into them all in depth, but you can have a look. Now you need to know also that, you know, you could do a minor, you could do a major. You probably know by now you can do double majors, or you can just do it on course by course basis. I also have often done directed readings with people at the fourth year level. We've had seminars at the fourth year level. So there's a lot of choice if you find the topic interesting. The whole idea of this introductory course is that it gives you some idea of the field and what you can study. And the list goes on. I'm just going to highlight a few here just to give you some idea of the breadth of our courses. So Religion, Colonialism, and State Violence was developed by me in response to the call to indigenize our curriculum. And so I would say a third to a half of that course looks at Canadian history in terms of Indigenous relationships with settler societies and religion and how that's played out in Canadian history. We also have the course Religion, Justice, and Animals, which is taught by Dr. Sal Renshaw, who works partly in gender equality and social justice and partly in RLCT. So that has been a very popular course with students from both those programs. We also offer quite a number of offerings that look at gender and women in religion, as you can see in both these cases at the bottom here, one focusing on the Bible and one on the larger Western tradition. Many of the courses that I'm showing you here are taught by Dr. Nathan Colburn, and he has a course on theory of religion. He's very interested in the topic of atheism, science and religion, and so on. And I know a number of you are interested in those topics, so you might want to consider that. We also have Dr. Adrian Langdon, who teaches courses like the paranormal, which is a perennial favorite, and cults and new religions. So if you're interested in those topics. And then Dr. Susan Strigley, who comes from a literature background, who has a number of course offerings related to such as spiritual journeys and courses related to death and immortality. Okay, so we come to it, the final exam, and I hope you're not feeling like this. And I just wanted to say that there's no trick when it comes to final exams. You just need to do the studying. And the one thing that I will say, and as I've said throughout the course, is that one of the differences between high school and university is that it's not just memorizing material, and this is a take-home exam, so it's certainly not about memorizing per se. It's about me seeing that you have gone through the material and you've thought about it and you understand it. So the questions are meant to allow me to see if you have understood the topics that we've been covering. So I'm hoping you're feeling more like the people in this photograph, and as I said, the easiest way to prepare for an exam is just to go over the material again, and I strongly suggest that you take notes. It's been shown that when you make handwritten notes, they tend to stick in your memory much more. And so take notes. And if you do come across areas that you're not sure of, then just reach out to me and I can discuss it with you. And so just work your way through the material and through the discussion boards, and that's the best way to prepare for the exam. The final exam will be posted Monday, November 29th at 9 a.m. and will be due December 13th at 5 p.m. on Blackboard. And I ask that you include your name in the class code on the exam. Please only use complete sentences, no point form. The exam will consist of short answer, and long essay. And for the long essay, I do suggest that you write out an outline just to keep things organized. When the longer things get, the more you benefit from having an outline. Now, students sometimes ask me how long the answer should be. I don't have a set requirement. I'm trying to leave it as open as possible so that you can show me what you know and what you've understood. That said, if the question is worth only 5 marks, then it's going to be shorter than one that's worth more. But I've left it as open as possible for you to show that you've understood and read the material. You don't need to cite sources in the exam. I'm treating this as I would if you were in person, and I wouldn't expect you to cite sources at an exam where we're in person, so you don't need to worry about that. So in this section, I'm just going to kind of highlight areas that you should focus on. And so you definitely need to have a sense of what your definition of religion is. This was at the very beginning of the course when we looked at the Bethune article, and then we looked at definitions of religion, which tend to vary quite drastically from thinker to thinker. I also want you to be aware of the ideas of some of the sociologists of religion, particularly Durkheim, whose work is very influential in the field of religious studies, and his concepts such as his definition of religion and his idea of anomie, which was his concern in French society as he saw the power of religion waning. What implications would this have for society? So he was very concerned about that. You also need to look at ideas around secularization. And so we know that, particularly in the 1960s, many sociologists assumed that religion would just disappear, that it would be replaced by things like science and technology. And many of them had to backpedal on that theory. So you need to understand that part. You also need to pay attention to the video clips that I've included. So that get at the issue of insider, outsider, emic, and etic, that division within religious studies. So we talked about the idea that religious studies came, in part at least, from the study of theology. So theology is an insider view. It's a Christian studying Christianity or Muslim studying Islam. That's one way of approaching religion, and probably the way most people do it. But academic study is an outsider look at religion, and so it doesn't privilege any particular tradition. And then you need to have an understanding of the material practice of religion, which is a growing field within religious studies, which is when the field began in the 1800s, there was a real emphasis on text and the reading of text, sacred texts, and so on. But we're seeing increasingly that the material practice of religion is a focus, and that includes things that normal people do. So the idea of how do people actually live their religion, and so that includes things like ritual, pilgrimage, what they eat, what they do all day, if they have a prayer room or an altar, these kind of practices. And so when people who study religion look at this material, we're much more able to see how just normal people understand religion rather than theologians or people who specialize in the study of religion. The next important area is sacred narrative, and so there's a whole lecture on that, so you need to go over that again. And why is this such a common way of understanding religion? Through story, through narrative, and how that influences culture? You need to have a sense of that. So moving on, so we're basically in some ways following the flow of the syllabus here. So the idea of how religion traditionally has established meanings in the world's cultures. And so what we're seeing is secular society bringing forward its answer to this, which is often forms of hedonism, so pleasure seeking, which, I mean, that's nothing new, that goes back to the Greeks. But so we see things like a variety of quote unquote happiness projects emerging in Western society as people are discussing what does it mean to live a good life. Do you need to be religious in order to do that, etc. And so I want you to be able to compare and contrast, particularly the two approaches of Gretchen Rubin and Emily Esfahani Smith and their different approaches to that question of what makes a good life. Then you'll need to look at the section on atheism. And so as we've been talking throughout the course, increasing numbers of people are not religious, although it's still a minority. And so this becomes a very important topic. And certainly many of the early atheists like Freud and Nietzsche were extremely hostile towards religion and basically felt that it just, Freud thought it was a delusion, a mass delusion. But we're seeing that a number of more contemporary atheists like Alain de Botton actually are kind of creating kind of a rapprochement with religion and a dialogue with religion. And so it's interesting to compare and contrast these different types of atheism. The next topic you need to look at is the idea of the sociology of religion, which and the psychology of religion as it relates to community. So one of the traditional roles that religion has played, whether it's Buddhism or Islam or Christianity or Hinduism, is its role in creating community. It does that in a variety of ways. And so we're seeing more and more studies now showing that for many secular people, they're suffering from feelings of enemy, alienation, and isolation, and so on. And so, as Botton has said, it's useful for us, whether we're religious or not, to look at how community contributes to health and how that also relates back to Bethune's and Buck's article at the very beginning of the course. Okay, now just to conclude here, I started out the course discussing that article on why religious people tend to be religious, to be physically and mentally healthier than the non-religious, and I think quite a few of you, as would many people, would be surprised by that. And so we need to look at ideas like the buffering hypothesis, which talks about how religion creates a kind of resilience within people and a kind of protection, and what are the factors within religion that do that. We've had a number of years now where people have really looked at that and tried to understand why religious people tend to be healthier. Okay, so that's a quick overview, and as I said, if you have any questions as you move through, you can just reach out to me and we can discuss it.